Hi, how's everyone doing? You seem like a super high energy group. Does anybody sitting at the back want to come forward? I mean, I assume not, otherwise you wouldn't be sitting at the back. And honestly, I am also the kind of person that sits at the back. But yeah, come forward, be together. Day's nearly over. Have you learned anything good today? Yeah? Cool. One person had a good time. Awesome. So my name's Cate. I'm from Automattic. Did you all like the socks? Yeah. Okay. You're welcome. If you tweet a picture of them, or it will make the people who did the actual work for that really happy, and then they'll also be pleased with me. So my name's Cate. I run the developer experience team at Automattic. I used to run the mobile team, which is now around 50 people all over the world. They are hiring. Come and talk to me afterwards if you want to talk about that at all. And just like a little bit of housekeeping, let me explain the raccoons. So I generally have been kind of in engineering management for about 3 years now. And when you move into engineering management, people are like, oh, herding cats. But I personally think that's kind of bollocks, right? Engineers, I believe, are much more like raccoons than cats. They're cuter, they're smarter, and they're just determined to live their best lives. This is what we get for being organized. So anyway, there's raccoons in this talk. They'll actually be going to space. Cheer them on. Cool. All right. So I'm a fixer. I take teams that are struggling and I help them improve, deliver more, deliver better, and feel happier. But what does this have to do with your team? I'm sure most of your teams are probably fine, right? But how do you know? If I ask you how good your team is, do you have an answer? Are you sure? What's your frame of reference? Now, in general, almost everybody thinks that their team could be better, but almost everybody thinks that their team is probably fine. So what if I ask you a different question? How much has your team improved in the last year? Now, how confident are you? More confident, right? We tend to have a lot more confidence in improvement. And let's think of a concrete example. Is 30 story points good? Well, that depends entirely on the context. And I saw an amazing talk last week by this woman who said that the PM was complaining about the velocity of the engineering team and how many story points were being done. So she just doubled the number of story points that everything was, and all of a sudden it's oh yeah, we're getting more done now. But obviously it's complete nonsense. So a lot of things become clearer when you realize it's much easier to measure progress than state. And so then we can reframe the question of how good is my team to, or what is right, to how can we be less wrong. And then we reframe the question from how good is my team to how do teams improve. So I'm just going to reduce my value into capitalism here and tell you that I'm not really a fixer, because there is no fixer. When you turn a team around, it really takes a team. It's an effort, it's an adventure that you go on together. So I'm really more of a facilitator than a fixer. So today we're going to talk about 4 layers of team functioning, and we're going to ask 4 questions. So there's 4 layers in a team, and we can think of these in terms of communication, but this is also the work that we do at each level to create clarity and agreement. So mission, the why; strategy, the how; tactics, the what; and execution, the do. So the mission is the why, and it's useful at the level when it tells you not just what you do, but what you don't do. Now, Automattic has a mission to democratize publishing, but that's much too broad for any team. So on the mobile team, we talk about making a great experience for mobile-only or mobile primary users. So what don't we do? Well, we don't try and make computer users happy. On the developer experience team, we talk about being a support for the entire engineering organization, focused at key inflection points. in teams and individuals. So there's a couple of key words there, right? The first is inflection point. So are we inviting ourselves to everybody's weekly meeting? Absolutely not. Another key word is support. So do we dictate? Vehemently no. Now, teams without a mission don't know what their purpose is, and their failure mode is like analysis paralysis and abdicating decisions. So how do you determine a mission? Like this raccoon has a mission to go to the moon. Isn't she adorable? So the mission should be aspirational, but within grasp. And often the where is handed down. We're going to the moon. But it's on you to extract and articulate the why. Like raccoons are fundamentally undervalued in society and we need to start again on the moon. Now, you want to craft a sentence that captures the purpose and guiding principles of your team. So how important is it to have a mission? Well, the main benefit is better decision making. Teams without a mission often spiral and spin from thing to thing, but if you have the mission, it really doesn't help without everything else. So the next layer is the strategy. This is the how. And your strategy is made up of proximate objectives. These are your next achievable goals. So, on mobile, we would talk about making what could be great on mobile great. And then we could break it down. Media can be really great on mobile. Let's make it really great. Notifications can be really great. Let's make them super great, really useful, really fast. Offline. This year, my team's been working a lot on scaling our engineering hiring process, and we had this number goal, but it was just so big, So instead, our initial focus was to build capacity because it was much more tractable and we could break it down into pieces. And once you have that capacity, you can push on other levers. It takes us towards our overall goal. Now, the strategy is the decisions that are made to deliver on the mission. But if you haven't made the decisions, then you can't work towards it. Teams without a strategy struggle to make decisions because almost anything can be declared to support the mission. So how do you determine a strategy? Well, good strategy requires both depth and breadth, and it takes the context of your team, the organization, and the broader world. The thing to know is that most strategy is bad. A good strategy does more than urges forward towards a goal or a vision. A good strategy honestly acknowledges the challenges being faced and provides an approach to overcoming them. And the greater the challenge, the more a good strategy focuses and coordinates effort to achieve a powerful competitive punch or problem-solving effect. Bad strategy tends to skip over pesky details such as problems. It ignores the power of choice and focus, trying instead to accommodate a multitude of conflicting demands and interests. Like a quarterback whose only advice to teammates is, let's win, bad strategy covers up its failure to guide by embracing the language of broad goals, ambition, vision, and values. It's from an amazing book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, and if you ever feel like your upper management is talking complete shit, read this book, it will make you feel better. Now, strategy taken from one place won't work elsewhere, and this is often true even within your organization because absolutely everything is contextual. Good strategy is tangible and progress can be measured. So when we decided to improve the media experience, we could make that concrete. We could identify improvements based on user feedback. We could look at other best-in-class media experiences, and it could be measured in metrics around media upload. Building out capacity in our hiring process is very tangible. That's super distracting. I'm so sorry. Can you not sit there and photograph me? It's really distracting. I'm so sorry. When we're building out capacity in our hiring process, it's very tangible. We know how many interviews we conduct in a given week, and we know how quickly someone can schedule in. Now, the most important piece of strategy is what you decide not to do. So some things you might decide not to do now, and some things you might decide not to do ever, but non-decisions are decisions to fail. You need to look at the different way to make progress and make decisions. One thing I really like to do on product engineering teams is to theme things, and by this I mean to group some smaller projects together to give them a sense of coherence and some metrics that indicate what that theme of work will improve. You really need to understand your metrics. What are the leading metrics for your high-level goal? In hiring, it's so easy because our metrics are people at every stage in the process. In product engineering, it's a bit harder, but you can always find things like how your 1 week retention influences your 1 month retention and so on. And your strategy has to fit the team you have. You might have 10 initiatives, but if you can only staff 2, then you have to choose 2. Because doing everything is not a strategy. And the other thing to think about with your strategy is what would make you change your approach. So you commit, and then you validate, and then you recommit. So tactics are the what. They're the concrete things that make things go, and you can also think of this as the process layer. And this makes the connection between the strategy and the work of the individual. Now, the tactics must be in support of the strategy, right? Because tactics without strategy is just busy work. Good process is always in service of an outcome. Now, teams without tactics can't work effectively. Collaboration is hard. It only gets harder at scale. So tactics are like your team APIs that allow you to interface with each other and across the organization. Now, how do you determine the tactics? Well, what do you need to know to be effective? What do you need to measure? And how's this problem generally solved? We rarely need to reinvent things in engineering teams, but we do need to be selective. Process should never be adopted wholesale, mainly because it won't be adopted wholesale. But often we can look at individual problems and find standard ways to address them. Now, developers talk about hating process, but my theory is that developers really love process. It's just when they love it, they call it culture. So we can reframe our questions with that knowledge, right? What kind of culture do you need to be successful? How can we build a culture of collaboration? What might help? Stand-ups, pairing, team calls. How can we build a culture that values users? What would help? User research, valuing support feedback. How can we build a culture of sustainable delivery? What would help? Regular releases, retrospectives, attention to defects and metrics. Now, these cultural questions will push you to make your processes coherent and supporting of what you actually want to achieve. Now, execution is the deal. There's a manager joke that says if managers call people resources, then they can call you overhead. But management is overhead, right? Everything we do is in service of other people getting stuff done. Because execution, this is where progress is made. The thing is that without the other layers, it's just activity, but everything else without this means nothing because nothing happens. So how do you determine the execution? Well, it's so easy, Are there people doing things, and is it clear what needs done? Now, hopefully as I was talking, you were seeing how this could apply to your teams, but it's important to note that everything needs to fit together, and few teams do all of these things equally well. Some people only value execution, which is on some level fair enough because it's the foundation for everything else, but execution is most effective when it fits in a coherent framework. Leaders often go to what they're most comfortable with. We've all met and usually disliked the person with a new process for every occasion. And at the other end of it, the visionary who thinks that everything will be fine once they've just determined what that is, usually by themselves. They're both wrong. The other layers need to be there as well, and these things need to balance each other out. Otherwise our raccoons, they're never going to get to the moon. So I promised you 4 questions, and these don't map to the layers. It's more like a grid, so you can ask these at every level. How can I create clarity? How can I create capacity? What do I want to incentivize? And what are my feedback loops? Now, there's a quote by Tolstoy that says, "Happy teams are all alike. Every unhappy team is unhappy in its own way." But I'm not sure I agree with Tolstoy. Unhappy teams tend to be tediously predictable. They're not delivering, they feel like victims, and they're kind of lost. Now, when you have a struggling team, the first question, where do I begin? Sometimes after you get off the phone with your BFF going, what have I done? Why did I agree to this? But the more helpful questions are, how do I create clarity? And how do I create capacity? Now, every struggling team I've encountered seems to be having some kind of existential crisis about who we are or what is our purpose, the mission question. But as a pragmatist, this often seems beside the point. If we're not shipping, what does it matter what we're not shipping? How can we possibly know what we should be doing 2 or 5 years from now if we don't have a coherent and consistent idea of what we're doing today? Now, here's the thing about the existential crisis. It is comfortable. It's a team bonding experience because it unites them against a common enemy. Now, it's not a good team building strategy uniting against a common enemy, but you really cannot fault it for short-term effectiveness. No one on the team feels threatened by the existential crisis because it's largely somebody else's problem. Everyone can have an opinion about it because it's abstract enough that most people won't have to do anything to shape or change it. Vision debates are the bike shedding of team purpose and structure. Now, clarity is much harder because it's more immediate and it has to be based on what's happening today, which means, do you remember that quote on strategy? Which means you need to confront what's actually happening today. There's no hiding behind this lack of vision. A team's delivering, a project's drifting on and on with no end in sight. Are we doing things because they're interesting, or are we doing them because they're valuable? Now, the more concrete we get, the harder it is to get everybody in agreement. A wide range of opinions can find shelter in a broad, fuzzy mission statement, in the way that just isn't possible in a narrow and clear one, like the kind of thing that articulates a proximate objective. Clarity involves hard conversations, hard truths, defining first one, then two, then 3 steps ahead. It's hard work that often looks really small from the outside. No here, no there, refining this, refining that. And it's often stating what at least some people believe to be true anyway, such as what isn't going well or what the next steps include. But it really is the most effective way I've found to stop teams from drifting and to get them to start executing. Now, what actions you take in order to achieve clarity depend on the team, but you might take stock of all ongoing projects as well as the purpose and timeline for each of those projects, and then you can ask, what's their strategic objective? You might articulate the current priorities of the team, the purposes of those priorities, and the rationale behind making them priorities. You might clearly define the scope of upcoming milestones in every current and new project. You might determine the timeframes you can predict. So say you can predict Q4, but you can't predict Q1 right now, and just be upfront about that. You might make sure that project status is visible and that teams have visibility into each other's work through things like stand-ups. Now, struggling teams also commonly suffer from a sense of overload, and often this is very unevenly distributed across the team. Some people seem exceptionally relaxed, whereas others seem alarmingly overwhelmed. Now, if you view your team as a system, you'll see where you have bottlenecks that, if they were cleared, would increase the overall capacity of your team. So 2 books I really like on this are Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows and A Beautiful Constraint. Now, what you might do depends on where the bottlenecks are. You might reduce the number of things that your team is working on because too many people are working alone. You might take a more strategic approach to tackling inbound requests because you can't keep playing whack-a-mole. You might realign people closer to the work they want to do because you need the right people in the right roles, and they're normally that much more effective if they actually enjoy them. And you might get the team to talk about timelines and embrace continuous delivery because having that force only come from the outside is invariably destructive. If you manage managers, improving them as leaders will always improve the capacity on your team. Their teams will get better, you can rely on them more and delegate more effectively. Sometimes it feels like we don't have time to coach the people around us, but medium term, not even long term, we really don't have time not to. Now, you can always come back to these questions because the answers change over time. There is always a bottleneck, and some level of confusion is part of the ambiguity of human communication. And it's important to make sure that you're not staying where you're comfortable, and that there's a different answer for each different layer. The meta question is what's most pressing. And it's also worth noting that sometimes you do the work and sometimes you encourage others to do the work. So no talk on kind of team effectiveness is complete without this quote, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think about that in terms of the next couple of questions. What am I incentivizing and how are my feedback loops? Now, there's a concept of self-managing teams, which I really prefer to reframe as self-improving teams. Self-improving teams have feedback loops that make getting better over time a team effort. They respond well to failure, and they learn as much from it as possible. They use estimation as a way to better surface the known and unknown unknowns. And they invest in collaboration that levels up individuals and the collective. Now, the question that might emerge from this is okay, if you have a self-improving team, do you even need a manager? Doesn't this render you redundant? And I would argue that This actually reframes the role of the manager as somebody who enables the team and who acts as an accelerant. It means moving away from this need to control and feeling that the value you bring comes from the power you have, and towards more of a coaching mindset and the acceptance that the value you bring is shown best in output and team health rather than in anything that you actively and obviously do. Now, every new manager struggles to let go of the individual work that they were doing before and presumably achieve some level of mastery at. And it's really hard to enter into this mindset, although very easy to claim it. A lot of managers talk about servant leadership, which generally seems to mean that either they're an ineffective doormat to their team or they're uncomfortable with the power they have, because you cannot be the servant of people you have power over. Now, managers also sometimes use this as a reason to abdicate responsibility for the day-to-day of the team. Like, responsibility can only be a product of control, and often, honestly, not even then, and power without responsibility is a form of sociopathy. Now, the best leaders master multiple leadership styles, and they know when they're best deployed. They know when to take the hard line of an authoritative stance, when a situation is bad enough that a coercive style is necessary. They know when a team would benefit from somebody setting the pace. They also know when to optimize for the increased buy-in of the democratic process and accept the slower progress, when a team needs an affiliative leader to help them bond, and when showing up as a collaborator will get the best of people, and when somebody needs a coach. Now, we all have our go-to and the default we lean on, but it's not appropriate for every occasion. And the more we can build out capabilities in different styles authentically and deploy them regularly, the more versatility we have for different situations. The authoritarian leader who suddenly shows up as a coach won't be believed, but the coaching leader who suddenly shows up as an authoritarian may not be taken seriously. The self-improving team is the place for the democratic and affiliative styles, but above all, the manager is coach and collaborator. Like all good coaches, you want to ask good questions, and like any good collaborator, you need to get in there and be willing to provide active help. Now, in almost every situation, you will get the behavior you incentivize. If you say you value feedback, but you silence dissent, well, you won't hear what people are thinking. If you say you value simplicity and user experience, but you promote people based on complexity, then you'll get a lot of complexity. The gap between claimed values and actual incentives is organizational hypocrisy. Being clear about incentives and then rewarding the things that you want to see is a key to making sure that teams are aligned. If you want to incentivize collaboration, you can't evaluate purely on individual metrics. If you want to incentivize honesty, you have to be willing to listen to things that are hard to hear. If you want to deliver user value, then you need to make sure that you recognize that work. The role of a manager in a self-improving team is to ensure that incentives align with the team improvement. Now, people only improve consistently if they get feedback, so feedback loops should be 1, tight, and 2, positive. This doesn't just mean feedback on what someone can do better, although obviously that's important. Feedback is really just someone's work reflected back to them, and making sure that people get consistent feedback and appreciation and incentive for what they're already doing well is really important. Giving people only constructive, or worse, only negative feedback will cause them to avoid you. So if we launch a new feature and we want to set up feedback loops around if anything goes wrong, like monitoring for downtime, support volume, but it's also really important to set up the feedback loops for what we expect to go right, like usage and positive feedback. The role of a manager in a self-improving team is to build and contribute to healthy, productive feedback cycles. Now, you get what you incentivize. It doesn't matter how you feel about that. One of my friends told me about a company that was no longer celebrating promotions because they didn't want people to be so focused on them anymore. And it's like, okay, cool, but if that's the culture you've created, the celebration is probably the least of it, and also who stops people from celebrating anyway? Now, on a good team, there's strong and coherent communication. So this is a product of psychological safety, as is the ability to treat failure as a learning opportunity. There's a good idea of what can be done and how. This is how those teams ship regularly. People understand why things should be done and why they shouldn't be done. They make active decisions. There are aligned incentives and strong feedback cycles. So this allows developing of individuals within the team, of growth and opportunity. So your team, like my team, well, they're probably fine, right? But they can probably be better too. And the stronger we build our teams, the further we can go.